While rock and roll was born in the decade before, the 1960s would mark the first full decade of rock. Oh, what a decade it was. Hi, I'm Dave Charity, and welcome to Volume 5 of 60s Legends. All summer long, we'll be profiling a different act from those magical years of rock and roll. In the spotlight this week, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. The Four Seasons have to be ranked as one of the top groups of the 60s, certifiable 60s legends. From 1962 to the end of the decade, the group sold more than 50 million records. They first formed in the New York area in the late 50s, calling themselves the Four Lovers. They were Tommy DeVito, his brother Nick, Hank Majewski, and Frankie Valli. After a chance meeting between Valli and record producer Bob Crew, they changed their name and their lineup as well. Nick DeVito and Hank Majewski were gone. In their places were Nick Massey and Bob Gaudio, who had enjoyed success in the group The Royal Teens. Frankie Valli explains.
I ran into Bob Crew, who had just been on an interview, and he said he'd like to hear what we were doing. And at that time, Bob was involved in producing records. He was involved with Cameo Parkway and all those people. I think he was doing Freddie Cannon and Danny and the Juniors, and he was, a whole bunch of people like that. The Rays, Silhouettes, Billy and Lily. We played him the tracks that we had cut. He liked them. He signed us to a record deal. We kind of did background on most of his productions for the first couple of years. And then in 62, we finally went to him and said, hey, Bob, we don't want to continue to do backgrounds. Are you going to record us or not? And we kind of forced him into recording us at that particular time. And we recorded Sherry.
Sherry, the first #1 hit for the Four Seasons. The group followed that song up with another record that would climb all the way to the top of the charts, Big Girls Don't Cry. Like Sherry, it was written by Bob Gaudio. Frankie Valli tells us the story.
It was inspired by a line in a movie with Clark Gable where the leading lady was crying, and he made reference in some way to say, come on, big girls don't cry. And Bob Crew was watching the movie, and he got the line, and he wrote it down, and he and Gaudio wrote a song, Big Girls Don't Cry.
Big Girls Don't Cry, the second consecutive #1 hit from the Four Seasons. After closing out 1962 with those two hits, they started 1963 the same way.
We really had a string of hits that went for quite a while, and I remember the first 3 records we released were Sherry, Big Girls Don't Cry, Walk Like a Man, and we dominated the #1 spot on all the charts for, God, it must have been about 5 or 6 months.
January of 1963, that's the Four Seasons' third consecutive chart topper, Walk Like a Man. This is Dave Charity. The group keeps up their winning ways when we return with more of 60s Legends. While the Four Four Seasons' first three records went to number one. Their summer of 1963 hit, Candy Girl, would make it only to number three. It was kept from the top spot by hits like My Boyfriend's Back, Fingertips, and Blue Velvet. The song was also the first of their hits not written by Bob Gaudio. Frankie Valli explains.
Larry Santos wrote Candy Girl. This is after we had Sherry and Big Girls Don't Cry and Walk Like a Man, and it was all of that kind of song, and Candy Girl. He was a staff writer for Bob Crew, and he wrote the song, and we listened to it. We thought it was good enough, and we did it.
I've been a searching all this big wide world. Now finally I found mine.
Candy Girl, a top 10 hit from the Four Seasons back in the summer of 1963. In 1964, the group left VJ Records over a royalty dispute, signing with Philips Records.
An incredible story about VJ Records was the fact that VJ all at one time had Jerry Butler, Betty Everett, Dee Clark, Gene Chandler, Gladys Knight and the Pips, John Lee Hooker, Jimmy Clanton, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, and the Beatles. And this record company broke. So you try to figure that one out.
The Four Seasons' last hit while on VJ was a remake of the classic record, Stay.
Just a little bit longer.
Stay, a VJ hit for the Four Seasons. Even before that hit, the band scored a top 10 song with their new label, Philips. Here's Dawn.
Pretty as a midsummer's morn. They call her Dawn.
Dawn, Go Away, a top 10 Four Seasons hit from early in 1964. The Four Seasons were so big at that time that when the Beatles first started having success here in the States, they were referred to as Britain's answer to the Four Seasons. As the Fab Four held the top spot with Can't Buy Me Love, the Four Seasons were challenging with this song.
I'll go on living and keep on forgiving because you were my first love. I'll go on living and keep on forgiving because you were my first love. I'll go on living and keep on forgiving because you were my first love. I'll go on living and keep on forgiving because you were my first love. I'll go on living.
Ronnie, a top 10 hit from the Four Seasons back in the spring of 1964. This is Dave Charity. Another number one hit is up next when we return with 60s legends. The Four Seasons scored their fourth number one single in July of 1964 with a song called Rag Doll. Frankie Valli tells us the story behind that song.
A little kid came up and started to clean Bob Gaudio's window on his car, and she just looked like a little beggar in such a way, with tattered clothes and all that. And he was just blown away, and her face just never left him. He went home and wrote a song called Rag Doll.
Rag Doll, a #1 hit from the Four Seasons back in the summer of 1964. The quartet would be back in the top 10 before the season was over. In August, they could be heard singing Save It For Me, their 8th single to crack the top 10. Save It For Me, a top 10 hit from the Four Seasons from August of 1964. This is Dave Charity. Frankie Valli returns when we return with 60s legend. One of the reasons the Four Seasons were so successful was the constant exposure they got from television. In their prime, they could be found on The Ed Sullivan Show or Dick Clark's American Bandstand, performing hits like this one from the fall of 1964, Big Man in Town. Big Man in Town, a top 20 hit for the Four Seasons on VJ Records, almost a year after leaving that company. At the same time, Phillips Records fought back by releasing this record, which surpassed the chart performance of the VJ single.
Can't put it off any longer. I just gotta tell you, anyway.
Bye-Bye Baby, Baby Goodbye, a top 20 hit from the Four Seasons in the first part of 1965. There's little doubt that the key to the group's sound was the 5-octave range of Frankie Valli. While truly one of rock and roll's greatest voices, his roots were elsewhere.
My roots were actually jazz before I got involved in rock and roll business. It's just that I starved at it for so long that I decided one day listening to the radio and said, geez, I could do that. And, you know, maybe 6 months or a year later, I was having hits. I come from the tail end of the big band era. I've seen every big band there ever was at least one time. I'm a Frank Sinatra fan. I'm a Billy Eckstine fan. I'm a Sarah Vaughan fan. All the great jazz players I've seen at least one time. So that's what my roots really were. And my favorite of all groups ever was the Four Freshmen.
There ain't no good in our goodbye. True love takes a lot of trying. Oh, I'm crying.
From October of 1965, that's the Four Seasons and the top 10 smash, Let's Hang On. This is Dave Charity. The same band with a different name is coming up on 60s Legends. In November of 1965, a group called The Wonder Who scored a top 20 hit with a cover of Bob Dylan's Don't Think Twice. The Wonder Who was, in fact, the Four Seasons. Frankie Valli remembers.
What happened actually was we were just getting a level. And I was just clowning around, and everybody said, "Hey, that sounds terrific. Let's do it like that." I thought they were kidding, and we did it, and it was actually the Wonder Who was very early on before I'd had any success. I used to emulate variations of different singers, and that Wonder Who happened to be somebody that an old-time jazz singer that I was a big fan of. Her name was Rose Murphy. It was a woman, and she sang like that. And I thought after the record was put out, I mean, I thought that it was, uniquely done to take a song like that, of that kind of seriousness, and do it in a campy kind of way.
Wonder Who, also known as the Four Seasons and Don't Think Twice. A few months later, the group was back in the top 10 with a record under their real name. Here's Working My Way Back to You, a song that would later be a hit for the Spinners.
Working my way back to you, babe, with a burning love inside, and the happiness outside. Oh, how I tried working my way back to you, babe.
Working My Way Back to You, the 10th top 10 hit for the Four Seasons. That song, like Let's Hang On, and this next record, Opus 17, came from a writer by the name of Sandy Linzer. Opus 17, Don't You Worry About Me, a top 20 hit from the Four Seasons in the summer of 1966. This is Dave Charity. More classics and some solo hits are coming up when we return with more from 60s legends, the Four Seasons, over the Hi, this is Dave Charity, and welcome back to this volume of 60s Legends. In the spotlight this week, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. In September of 1966, after scoring a string of hits written by band member Bob Gaudio and a host of other writers for Bob Crew's record company, the Four Seasons would reach the top 10 with Cole Porter's classic, I've Got You Under My Skin. Frankie Valli tells us the story.
We were in Florida doing a music convention, and Sinatra was working at the Fontainebleau. And we were invited guests, so we went over to see the show, and Gaudio got this brainstorm and called me in the middle of the night. He said, I got to talk to you right now. And I said, okay. He said, we have to go in the studio right away and record I've Got You Under My Skin. I said, okay. Call me in the morning, and we'll go in the studio, and we'll do it. He said, no, I'm serious. He said, I hear a whole arrangement, and evidently that's exactly what he heard. We went in and recorded it.
I've Got You Under My Skin, a top 10 hit for Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons back in the fall of 1966. In early 1967, they would score their 30th pop hit and their 12th to reach the top 10. The song was called Tell It to the Rain. Into the Rain, a top 10 hit from the Four Seasons back in December of 1966. The following year, Frankie Valli would go out on his own to score his first solo hit, Can't Take My Eyes Off You. It was his fourth solo release of that era, but Frankie tells us that his solo career and his career with the Four Seasons were closely intertwined.
I wasn't egotistical and get rid of these guys, and you know, it was all the same thing. I owned everything anyway, so what was the difference? I was one of the partners in the Four Seasons. I owned my own career as Frankie Valli. We had a publishing company. We owned our masters. What was the difference?
You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off you. Still me when
Can't Take My Eyes Off You, a top 10 solo hit from Frankie Valli. This is Dave Charity. Another top 10 group hit is coming up when we return to 60s Legends. The Four Seasons scored their last big hit of the 60s in June of 1967. The song was a top 10 record called Come On, Mary Ann. Come On, Mary Ann, a top 10 hit from the Four Seasons in the summer of 1967. The band would undergo numerous personnel changes throughout the rest of the decade. Early in the 70s, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons were signed to Motown Records. After leaving that company, Frankie Valli would score a hit from that brief stay. He explains.
My Eyes Adored You. After we bought it back from Motown, we brought it to every record company in the business and was turned down. Until we found Larry Utah, who just started a brand new company called Private Stock. He heard it, he says, I love it. He says, that's my first hit record with my new label, and he was right.
my eyes enjoyed you. Oh, I never laid a hand on you. My eyes enjoyed you. All my life I will remember. I never laid tender.
My Eyes Adored You, a number one hit from Frankie Valli in March of 1975. This is Dave Charity. Another group hit is coming up with 60s Legends. After Frankie Valli topped the charts in March of 1975 with My Eyes Adored You, he returned with the Four Seasons to score a top 10 hit called Who Loves You? From the summer of 1975, that's the Four Seasons and Who Loves You. The band's comeback would be complete in December of 1975 when they scored a number one hit called December 1963, Oh, What a Night.
It was written about prohibition, and we had some discussion about that. Would the kids know anything or relate to prohibition in any way? My feeling was they wouldn't. We discussed it for an awfully long time, and I felt very strong. I thought the track was definitely a smash track. And I convinced Bob to rewrite the song. He went home and rewrote it that night.
Oh, what a night. Late December back in 63.
December November 1963. Oh, what a night. A #1 hit for 60s legends, The Four Seasons. The 60s Legends series was written and produced by Rich Viscuto and developed with Denise Oliver. Executive producer, Ed Salomon. Copyright 1992, the Unistar Radio Network Incorporated. This is Dave Charity. Be listening next week as we salute the Temptations on 60s Legends over the Unistar Radio Network.